Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm particularly proud to be here with Julian Egerman, whose work I've known for a long time, but have never had the opportunity to meet. So thank you very much, and thank you, Shoshana, for pinch hitting. So I have about 3.5 hours of material, but I'm going to squeeze it into about 10 minutes. But what I'd like you to do as I speak is to think of what I'm saying as kind of a living web page. And you can go back and click on almost anything, and we'll go a little deeper into that topic, because it's, I want to get to our questions as soon as possible. I want to cover some of the core issues that emerge in this debate, and I want to be sure that I give you a sense of how dynamic and important this area is. Now, just out of curiosity, how many of you, if any, were at the Bill McKibben event on November 15th? Great. So you experienced that enormously exciting event, and you heard about the severity of climate change. I'm not going to review that information now. And one of the core reasons why the divestment movement is so important is because we are right now in history at a moment when people need to wake up. People have been, Americans particularly, have been asleep for a very long time on this question, and they've been kept asleep by the fossil fuel industry. And we are starting to see significant change just in the last few months, but we need that change to be accelerated. And the change has come through, sadly, through the devastation of Hurricane Sandy. It's come through the divestment movement, the actions of 350.org, as people realize, my goodness, this is an issue that young people care about and is not going to go away. And then finally, a little bit late, but still a very welcome moment, the President of the United States addressed it in his second inaugural address. And so we are now picking up steam, so to speak. Now, I want to speak, you heard briefly that I have a background in the South African divestment movement, and we could talk about the precedents, some of which are directly relevant and some of which are a little different, for quite some time. But I'm going to try to review a few of the arguments that came up then and that are reappearing now. Who's keeping time for me? So, yes, Katie's going to keep time for me. So you start waving at me when I'm joking. One question is the question of effectiveness. Is selling stock from an endowment an effective way to make change? Now, I'm sure we'll talk about that more tonight, but one of the things that's very important for you to remember is that the argument for engaging, and maybe even just one person or one institution, is really the core idea of civic engagement. You could say, well, maybe it doesn't matter, I don't need to vote, and unfortunately some people do. But the notion of civic engagement and of people acting, and then cumulatively of them having a major role, is a key part of the divestment campaign. We want you to act, and then we want the university to act, and then we want other universities to act, and then we want, finally, the United States government and other powerful institutions to act. Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop of Cape Town and the Nobel Peace Prize winner, said, "We could not have achieved our freedom and a just peace without the help of people around the world who, through the use of nonviolent means, such as boycotts and divestment, encourage their governments and other corporate actors to reverse decades-long support for the apartheid regime. And students," he said, "played a leading role in this struggle." The next thing I want to mention is that we need to keep in mind means and ends. Divestment is not an end in itself. It is a tactic or a strategy, depending on how you look at it, to achieve certain goals. And one of the things that's critical is to remember that without public support, politicians find it very hard to act. There's an old saying that Randall Robinson, the head of Trans-Africa, an anti-apartheid leader, used to say. He said, if you want a politician to lead, you need to form a parade, and then they will find their way to the front. So what you're doing here and across the country is forming a parade, and the purpose is not only to challenge fossil fuel companies directly and have them feel the discontent of institutions and leaders, but to raise the level of urgency and personal engagement of citizens and policymakers. So it intensifies the struggle, is another way of putting it. Or, to use a very American phrase, it is putting our money where our mouths are. And it is asking people to really take concrete steps in support of their goals. Now, another argument, which was heard during South Africa and will be heard, and I gather was even raised today, very traditional argument, is that selling stock violates our fiduciary duty. That sounds like a very scary thing. And let me just tell you right now, and I'll debate anybody on this, it's not true. There is the illusion that the maximization of wealth is the goal of every endowment, but that is not true. It is the maximization of wealth within the values of that institution. So you're not forced to do something you don't want to do. And on top of that, fossil fuel companies, in the long run, if you believe that climate change is a serious problem, are a bad investment. They have a broken business model. As was referred to very quickly in this slide, they have 5 times the amount of reserves that can be burned before the planet is wrecked. So either they're going to burn all that stuff and we're in deeper and deeper and deeper trouble, or the value of those reserves on their books is going to be destroyed. That's called a stranded asset, and their value is going to drop. If we put a price on carbon, if a company is successfully sued for climate damage, all kinds of things could happen. So they're bad business bad. And under no definition of fiduciary duty are you required to make a bad business bet. Just not true. Okay, we can even argue, by the way, it's an obligation to dump bad business bets. Now, another argument that comes up is, well, isn't divestment going to cause the loss of returns? Well, again, a lot of finance could come and be discussed around this, but unless you hold that the only way you can make money is to hold a bit of stock in every company in the country, which is called indexing, different forms of indexing, this is a really interesting and, again, flawed argument, because virtually every stock manager in Wall Street shrinks the investment universe according to some standard that they think is going to make money. Just to give you an example, I went on the Fidelity website, and these are all different mutual funds that shrink the universe because they think they're going to make money. The Diversified Emerging Markets Fund, the Europe Capital Appreciation Fund, the Global Commodity Stock Fund, the Growth Discovery Fund, which I have no idea what that is, the International Real Estate Fund. So everyone has a theory about how we're going to make money, and they restrict what they buy. And you can even buy into a fund of funds, which focuses on chemicals, transportation, biotech, industrials, pharmaceuticals, or retail. And it's very interesting. 5% of your endowment in energy is not very, in fossil fuels is not very much. 95% is already in other things. Okay, another argument that's often made, and I'm going to skip over this, but we can come back, is that it's better to hold the stock and engage with the companies than to sell it. Now, believe me, I understand that argument because the group that I ran, Ceres, its whole theory of action was persuading investors to engage companies to push them forward on energy efficiency, climate change, and so forth. It could be a very effective strategy. The problem is that we've been trying this now for about 25 years, and it hasn't really worked with regard to climate change. Now, I want to shift very quickly because I want to give you a little bit of a magic formula. And some of you might even want to think about writing this down, because one of the things I looked at when I was studying the divestment movement was what arguments really persuaded institutions to move or to not move. What things were they worried about? You can't walk into a board of trustees or to any organization and say, morally I feel that this is repugnant, so you have to do something. Because every institution is run on the basis of its policies. That is, the rules that it has built up over a long period of time to how to deal with problems when they come up. So every institution, including Tufts, has a set of policies. And so you have to figure out how to graft these moral or pressing political issues onto their policies. Now, policies tend to break down into 5 things. 1, a university worries about its survival. Are we going to be here in 100 years? It's one of our missions to have this cross-generational commitment so that what we do builds for the future, and so that students like you, your great and great-great-grandchildren, can be here. And so they don't want to do things, that makes them conservative, they don't want to do things that will perhaps jeopardize their survival. Now, we can go into how divestment does not in any way jeopardize their survival, but it's important for you to know that that fear is lurking in the back of their heads. Another is, will this affect our growth? We have to grow to be able to give, and this is a real issue, we have to grow to be able to give scholarships, we have to grow to be able to build new buildings, we have to keep growing. It's an impulse of life. It's a problem with our economy, the fact that we're so committed to growth with planetary limits, but it's a very natural thing. So another argument you have to deal with and that you have to counter is that divestment will somehow destroy growth. It's very easy to get quickly in the weeds about finance there, but the answer, as I alluded to before, is that it does not have to in any way. Another thing is efficiency. Is this a waste of time and money? They're going to tell you, as students, those of you who support this, this is a waste of your time and money as students. There are going to be better ways to do this. There are other things we could be doing. Let's fund a program that studies climate change so that other people will know what to do. We don't need to do anything. We'll fund what other people need to do. Or other efficiency or effectiveness arguments. The third thing, which is probably the most important thing for a divestment debate, is legitimacy. And that's where you start to get into the core purpose of the institution. And this was alluded to before, when is owning stock in broken model fossil fuel companies committed to destroying the planet consistent with the rest, or legitimate, in comparison to the rest of the university's policies and its mission. I didn't get a chance to look up Tufts' mission, but I bet it says something like, Tufts is committed to advancing citizens of the modern world, and something like that. That's great, and that's what trustees and president goes back to in thinking about why are we here and what are we doing. But you need to key into that mission and explain, as you are doing right now, why it ties in. So that's the legitimacy question. And the last one I started to talk about without even fully meaning to was consistency. That's why it was so important that we saw that Tufts has already had the policy of divestment in relation to South Africa and in relation to Quebec Hydro. And so Tufts' own sort of vertical consistency over time is very important. The other thing, consistency that is horizontal, that is looking at what other schools are doing. So we've already had a few smaller schools commit to divestment. We have, as you know, 170 schools thinking about it right now. I was talking to student leaders at Tufts and RISD just earlier this week. It's amazing to me, something I did not know. Brown already has an established policy for divestment. So you need to be in touch with the Brown students. They have a policy where if they want to raise the question, there's a committee that looks at it, they study it. This is different from most schools. And I would say very different from Tufts, which I gather you've had trouble even getting the basics about what you're invested in, which is really fundamentally wrong. A school committed to open debate hides one of the most critical facts about it. So consistency across time, what Tufts has done in the past, consistency across what is going on already around the country. Okay, I want to start to wrap up here by talking about ownership. Now, we expect that ownership implies responsibility. If you own a house and something happens in that house, you're responsible. If you own a dog and the dog bites somebody, you're responsible. If you own stock, you are part owners of that company and you are responsible. You can say you're not really, not very much, and so forth, but there is that link. And that's something that is critically important, because when you talk to a corporate leader and say, who are you most responsible to? They'll say, the shareholders. We are here to serve the shareholders. Well, who are the shareholders? Tufts. So your ownership is an issue that's core to how we define the operation of our law and our economy. And finally, I want to address the question of international equity. There was an amazing piece that popped up today, I'd never seen it before, written by James Lawrence Powell, who was acting president of Oberlin, president of Franklin and Marshall College, president of Reed College, president of Franklin Institute. Now, I don't think he was all those things at the same time, but he seems to have had a distinguished career. And he goes on to say, as the years and decades, first of all, he says, the overriding obligation of those responsible for a college endowment is to ensure that future student generations benefit to the same extent as the current generation. Trustees achieve this balance by adjusting how much of endowment earnings they spend each year and how much they reinvest. But global warming puts a new slant on the matter. By investing in fossil fuels, colleges are using their current financial resources in a way that jeopardizes the quality of life of their future alumni. By any reasoned and humane interpretation, this violates college's professed commitment to intergenerational equity. So you're acting not only on your own behalf, but you're acting in the future behalf. And finally, I just want to say, I think that it is incredibly great that you are interested in this, and important. But it's also an embarrassment, because in a sense, who should be interested in this issue? Well, it should have been the President of the United States over the last 4 years. It should have been the United States Senate. It should have been the House of Representatives. It should have been the corporate leaders. It should have been college presidents. It should have been the people who actually have real power in the United States. All of them have remained quiet. And none of them has done something that has caused significant change. So by default, it is now falling on you. Now, that's a privilege, that's an opportunity, and it's an obligation. And I urge you to seize it. Thank you.